When America talks, people listen. But what do they hear? And what happens when what America says changes over time? And we're not talking about what Trump may have said in his first administration, for example. We're talking what he may have said this week and what he may say next week and what he said 2 months before this. And when these things change dramatically, people have to wonder, what does the United States stand for? And what does, especially President Trump himself, what is his guiding philosophy? What are his moral imperatives? What are his strategic outlooks? What does he view as important fundamentals for the United States upon which you can understand what the U.S. is going to do? This is a very important issue right now because President Trump has now gone completely back from what he said he was going to do several times on the issue of weapons and ammunition for Ukraine. And as you're going to see here in a minute, he said overnight that he has basically reversed everything that he had said before, and he's not cutting anything off. To the contrary, he may be increasing what we're doing, especially in the issue of interceptor missiles. And listen, flip-flopping is as old as politics, centuries back. I mean, millennia probably going back. I mean, that's just kind of what people do. They'll say one thing if it benefits them today, and then they'll say another thing. But one of the things I think you can say for the most part, especially when you're thinking about any politician in the current American age that are often accused of being flip-floppers in campaigns or whatever, you can look at that. You can say, okay, well, this candidate said this back here in the past because that benefited them. And then when the conditions change, like, all right, well, then now he said this because that benefits him here too. This one is not quite like that. This one is more puzzling, because I can't see anything President Trump gains from flip-flopping on this issue of weapons and ammunition for Ukraine. And we're going to see now why that is and why it's so puzzling. But there's bigger issues at stake here. If people cannot trust what the United States says, if they don't even know where the U.S. stands on an issue, then that leaves people across the world, and we're talking allies and friends alike and adversaries, all of them together. They'll be making decisions based on what they want to do, and they may not be paying any attention to what the American leadership says, because it could change by 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the day that they may say something. And that is a bad thing. If there is no predictability about what the United States stands for and what its principles and its values are and the things upon which it makes decisions, then you have more and more chaos and freelancing. And very often, that has ramifications and bounces back in ways that are not good for us. We need to see this change, but we have what we have. But let's get into it so you understand what we're talking about here. There was yesterday, Marco Rubio was interviewed. I think he was in Asia at a foreign ministers conference, and one of the persons he talked to there was Sergei Lavrov. And afterwards, he was asked, how is this working out here? What did you discuss?
Since January of this year, as an example, just to give you on the Russian side, they've lost 100,000 soldiers, dead. Not injured, I'm talking about dead. And on the Ukrainian side, the numbers are less, but still very significant. We're also frustrated that more progress has not been made. And hopefully, based on today and in the days to come, we'll have more clarity about what exactly the Russian position and priorities are in this regard, and can begin to make some progress. But it's been difficult, as you've seen.
We're frustrated, he says. We're trying to find something. We're going to have some new ideas, and he says. We talked to Sergei Lavrov. Maybe we have some new thoughts here, but we're trying to figure out what the Russians are all about, what they're saying. Then keep that in mind. We're gonna touch on that in just a second. But let me first of all start on his issue of, well, we're trying to find a way out, but we're just kind of frustrated. That was July the 10th. Back up about 3 months earlier to April 18th. And here's where Rubio was at that time.
We are now reaching a point where we need to decide and determine whether this is even possible or not, which is why we're engaging both sides to try to figure out very soon, and I'm talking about a matter of days, not a matter of weeks, whether or not this is a war that can be ended. If it can, we're prepared to do whatever we can to facilitate that and make sure that it happens, that it ends in a durable and just way. If it's not possible, if we're so far apart that this is not going to happen, then I think the president is probably at a point where he's going to say, well, we're done. but we're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end. So we need to determine very quickly now, and I'm talking about in a matter of days, whether or not this is doable over the next few weeks. If it is, we're in. If it's not, then we have other priorities to focus on as well.
That seemed pretty point blank, pretty categorical at the time. You may recall that we were all over that when he said that. We cheered it on. We said, good, this is so different than the Biden administration, because they were ever talking about were, quote, as long as it takes, and they were giving them whatever they wanted. They were delaying some of it, but they eventually almost always came across. In fact, in every category that I'm aware of, the Biden administration eventually came across and gave them what they wanted. Not as many as they wanted, but there were, like I said, tens of thousands of military vehicles of different kinds, millions, hundreds of millions of rounds of ammunition, millions of rounds of artillery shells, et cetera, thousands upon thousands of missiles, et cetera, all this kind of stuff. That's what Biden used to do with no strategic idea in mind, other than some amorphous, we want to hurt Russia. They didn't ever have a plan beyond that. And so they were emptying out our coffers left and right with no objective in mind. And so at least, all right, well, now here comes the Trump administration, a little belatedly. He started as far back as 2023 saying he would end the war in a day because he knew Trump, or he knew Putin, he knew Zelensky, he worked with them both, and just get them in a room and get it solved. I thought, all right, well, he didn't start the process on day one. He kind of, slow rolled a lot of stuff. But okay, by April, at least he's finally moving in the right direction. Awesome. And now then he says we are days away, not weeks. He emphasized it. He didn't even use the word months, just days away. He said it 2 times in that one soundbite right there. And now here we're not weeks away, we're months away. And now he's still saying, as of yesterday, we're frustrated. Okay, so let's just start right here. What did you mean? What did the president mean on April 18th when you said that we are days away from walking? If we can't get the two sides together, was the criteria that he used, then we're going to walk away. Obviously, the two sides never came together. In fact, the two sides went farther apart. There is no question, especially based on what the Russians have said since earlier this month in July, and what the Ukraine side and the Western European side did as recently as yesterday, and they have another meeting in Rome today about a reconstruction conference. They're looking in the opposite direction. They want more ammunition and weapons, and they want more commitment to have more money over multiple years. No one's even talking about any sort of diplomacy at all. They use this fig leaf of something about, well, we're going to a just and enduring peace, but no one is actually talking on the Western side what that would actually mean to end the war. Is it to surrender everything in Ukraine on the eastern side of the line of contact? I mean, they won't even talk that. They just say that we're not in. Zelensky still talks about winning. So when you have that, and then on the Russian side, as you're going to see graphically portrayed here in just a second, they're in a rather different place. They're further away than they were on April 18th. So there's no question. If that was what you meant, then the evidence said, are you going to do what you said? Are you going to be good to your word? And the answer is no. We don't have to wait any further, because we can see the days passed, the weeks passed, now the months are rolling past. We're a week away from getting into the next, to starting a 4th month away from that. That's just the facts, folks. That is black and white, clear cut. We did not mean what we said on April 18th. So that's your first strike, because people are going to now have plenty of graphic evidence to say, you were really emphatic about that then. And should we have believed it? Well, the clear answer is no, because now 3 months later, we're still, quote, frustrated and looking for something new. But the Russians aren't. The Russians have continued to be very consistent, and they're consistent to this day. And then in this next piece here, I want to play a couple of other things from Rubio's press conference there, where he was talking to the folks. And he says, actually, we have some new ideas.
On Russia, just these ideas that were put on the table today, would you characterize them as new ideas from the Russian side that the Trump administration had not heard before?
Yes. Well, I think maybe, yes. I think it's a new and a different approach. Again, I wouldn't characterize it as something that guarantees a peace, but it's a concept that, we'll take back to the president today and here as soon as I finish with you.
Okay. new ideas. Terrific. So perhaps Sergei Lavrov told him something different than what they've told him before. So maybe Russia isn't so consistent as I suggest. Except when you go to the Russian media and you look at the Russian readout of that conversation, this is how the Russians are viewing it. This is what this is from today's news on RIA Novosti in Russia. This is how the Russians are reporting it. This is Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that in a meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he confirmed Russia's position on the settlement. Confirmed Russia's position on the settlement. Nothing about new ideas. And then the quote, yes, we discussed Ukraine. We reaffirmed the position that President Putin stated, including once again on July 3rd conversation with President Trump. So he's saying basically, not only is there nothing new, we just reaffirmed our existing previous position, which President Putin specifically and personally told to Trump in a phone call on July 3rd. In case you don't remember what that was, we've got that for you here. This is how the Russians characterized that phone call on July the 3rd. And that was Yuri Yushakov was the spokesman for Putin. He said, our president also said that Russia will achieve its goals. That is the elimination of all the root causes that led to the current state of affairs, to the current confrontation. And Russia will not retreat from these goals. So you had Sergei Lavrov characterizing his conversation with Rubio, that everything that was said on July 3rd still stands. And then you had Rubio not talking about anything about that, only some new ideas that the Russians had, so he says. Now, it's entirely possible that Russia says, look, I mean, maybe we can put lipstick on this pig for you. Maybe we can just give you a little sweetener here and there to make this bitter pill go down, and we'll do X, Y, Z. Who knows? We'll find out what that is in the coming days, presumably. But that was clearly in conjunction with, but the fundamentals are not going to change. There's almost no way that Russia can change it. I mean, Putin can't go back from a position of strength and give something that he doesn't have to give to the Western side just so Trump doesn't get mad. I mean, that's not on the table for the Russian side to be worried about whether Trump is or isn't happy, because they're going to continue going forward, and they keep saying that all the time. You talk about all the flip-flopping that we're doing, which I'm showing you throughout this episode here. There's no such flip-flopping on the Russian side. They are methodical and relentless and consistent. They will have what they consider to be the root causes of this. And if they don't get a negotiated settlement to the terms that they're demanding, they're simply going to continue forward on the battlefield. Everybody we've shown you in the interview we had yesterday with George Mansorov's at the tactical level, at many of the generals that we've shown you clips of said, Russian generals, the Sergei Lavrov himself, their ambassador Novenzia, and then up to Putin himself, in categorical, unquestioned terms, they say the same things over and over. But we keep looking for a different outcome. We want things to be different, so we just keep putting the blinders on. And look, I get it. The Western Europeans have done that, because when Biden left office, they were all on one sheet of music, and now here comes Trump on a different sheet. But these guys still are on that sheet, so you obviously have a cacophony of contradictions. But they've been really trying to put a lot of pressure, along with Volodymyr Zelensky, to change Trump. And dude, you got to be honest. They're succeeding. It is the West and Zelensky who are having success at getting Trump to change his position and move over into them. And honestly, this is starting to look like Joe Biden light. What Trump is doing is radically different than what he campaigned on and what he said so emphatically in the early part of his young second term already. Now he's starting to sound more like Biden. And that should trouble everybody for a whole bunch of reasons. But let's continue on here, because it's about to get a little bit worse. Rubio was also talking and asked about this issue. You may recall that there was, for the third time in this administration, that there was a pause put in the weapons deliveries, intelligence sharings, and several other things, but then they went back on. So the question was, in this last one, and this is a little over a week ago, you had Ambassador Whitaker say, listen, this is America first. We got to put our needs first. We can't keep giving stuff to somebody else, and we don't have enough. And then Sean Parnell came on for the DOD spokesman, came out and emphasized a little bit more strongly. We've done an analysis, and we have to make sure that what we give is not going to cause a problem with what we have at our security. This is America first. This is what it looks like, he said. And so they asked Rubio, Is there a shortage on interceptor missiles?
Not because there is a shortage, but because it's prudent to look at it and say, okay, do we have enough of these in our stockpiles for all of our obligations around the world, both in defense of our bases in the Middle East, but also our obligations to our Indo-Pacific partners and any other contingencies that might arise. But in the end, I would say that the overwhelming majority of defense of military aid that the United States provides Ukraine has never been paused and continues along the same schedules that it's been. I think there's a broader issue unrelated to the pause, and that involves the defense productive capabilities of the West, not just us, but of Europe. As an example, one of the things that the Ukrainians need is more Patriot batteries. There are Patriot batteries available in multiple countries in Europe, yet no one wants to part with them. So I hope that'll change.
So we could have pulled up here for review on May the 20th, where, again, Rubio went to Senate testimony and said, we're not giving up any of these things, folks. We just don't have them. And he said, now, there's others in Europe that do, and we'll talk about that. But he said, May 20th, we don't have them. We don't have any to give. That's what he said on the record and Senate testimony. But now then, here we have last night, after emphatically, in fact, actually, before I get to that, earlier this week, Trump was 2 times asked about this by 2 separate reporters at different venues about this on again, off again, pause, unpause situation. And he was asked, who made that decision? And you saw one he mocked and said, will you tell me? And then the other ones, he just didn't answer. And it was pretty clear that if you're not given the answer, who is? And Trump said, well, it would have been me. I'm the only one that can do it. But that's not answering the question. So there's an additional issue of who's actually in charge, who is running the show in the Pentagon, in the State Department, at the administration, because Trump seems to be like someone's informing him after the fact of something that's happened. So let's throw that in the mix too, because that just makes it a little bit more troubling. But so we had Marco Rubio going from May 20th saying we don't have interceptor missiles to give. And then you have on July the 1st and 2nd, you have, and 2nd and 3rd, you had American UN ambassadors. You had the chief spokesman for the DOD saying, we've done this analysis. We have to make sure we don't get below this time here. And then now last night on NBC News, after a phone conversation with the president, NBC News, Kristen Welker drops this bombshell.
The president said he's disappointed in Russia and told us he thinks he'll have a major statement to make about Russia on Monday. Though when pressed, he did not say what that statement will be. The president also said he just made a deal today with NATO in which he says the U.S. will send weapons to Ukraine through NATO, and NATO is, quote, paying for those weapons 100%, including the Patriot air defenses that Ukraine has been asking for, and that NATO will distribute them.
Look, it doesn't matter who pays for them. I mean, it would be, if you're going to give something away, it's great if somebody else pays for it. Sure, why not? But in overall terms, especially in terms of the defense budget, et cetera, it's a relatively small number, even though the missiles per se by themselves are quite expensive in a per unit cost. And when you're talking about the whole overall DoD budget, it's a very small portion. So to get someone else to pay for it, that's cool, I suppose, but it doesn't really change anything. But what matters a lot is how many there are. And there are clearly plenty of people that are saying that have been in, whether it's been leaked information in the U.S. press or just common sense. We are low on these because consider, I mean, we've had from February 2022 up to the end of the Biden administration given tons of these missiles, hundreds of them, probably in the thousands that have been given. We've been given Patriot batteries, and then we've given the interceptors that go along with those. Then after the Trump administration came in, there was no change to that. We continued to let flow whatever was going on there. So whatever had already been agreed to, we're continuing to send that off. Then you had the Red Sea issue where the U.S. was trying to quell the Houthis in the Red Sea, which burned up a bunch of interceptors at sea and in the air to try and keep the shipping lanes open, which we finally ended up stopping. We had twice in 2024 under the Biden administration, we physically helped intercept incoming Iranian missiles from Israel. Then now Trump did the same thing here. And then all of a sudden, this so-called 12-day war between Iran and Israel. Again, we provided a ton of missiles for both the Israeli Iron Dome system, their integrated air defense system, as well as our assets personally engaging also in intercepting those missiles. So you've had a huge drop in them. Now here comes Zelensky for months months now has been begging for more interceptor missiles, more Patriot batteries, etc. And even the batteries per se is not the biggest issue. There are limitations on that. But the much bigger issue is the interceptor missiles themselves, which apply across the board. So there is no question that there are fewer of them today than there we have. That there is clearly, by senior Pentagon officials, are sounding the alarm bells that we're below what we need if we get into a war. That we have to have a certain number, and even that, and I think that number that they've used, I think evidence indicates that number that they have set as the ceiling for how many we can give away is too low. It needs to be a lot higher, because as this war shows, the Russia-Ukraine war, and even the Israeli-Iranian war for that matter, shows that in the modern age right now, the side that has the most air defense, offensive and defensive missiles is going to have the best chances to succeed. And if you have insufficient numbers of either and your opponent does, then look at Kiev, because that's exactly what's the case there. They have some, they don't have enough. Russia has more offensive missiles than Ukraine is going to ever be able to produce in defensive interceptors. So this number by itself, even just looking at what's been asked for, is insufficient to change the dynamic that's already decisively in Russia's advantage. That's one thing. But now then to ignore that and ignore that it's not going to make any difference in this conflict, you're actually now drawing down our own inventory. And we know, because this is open source information, and I've seen it, I've had it confirmed by those on the inside that know, we're producing around 600 missiles per year. That is not a fraction of enough. And you see, Russia's launching 500-700 almost every night, every other night practically. Apparently, they're going to go higher than that. We can expect that to continue on, according to open sources. So these missiles, there's just not enough of them, period. Point blank, end of story. And if you continue to give them, even though our production capacity is too low, then what does that tell you about the inventory? There's only one other place you can get it. Whoever pays for it doesn't really matter. That's the bottom line. We don't have enough to go around for others and ourselves. So by going down this path, this is another thing to throw in the problem category here. You're putting American national security at risk, because if we get into an unexpected conflict somewhere, we will not have enough air defense interceptor missiles for our own national security. Understand that. That is a fact. We simply don't have enough. If we get into a sustained conflict, we can maybe do well for a number of weeks, but we don't have the capacity to start cranking those things out like the Russians do, like apparently the Chinese do, who apparently learned this lesson without having to go to war. But the Russians, because they went to war. We have been watching both, and we still haven't changed it. So that is a problem that we have here. But look, Trump seems to be focused on other things. He's focused on, and you saw it a little bit there. He's angry at Putin, and what was relayed there by Kristen Welker. He's angry at Putin, and he's not happy with him at all. And why would he expect any different outcome? Because again, going back to that July 3rd phone call with Putin, you had Trump saying that he was not happy with the phone call. He said before, because Trump, according to the readout on both sides, he was asking him for, again, an unconditional ceasefire. Why would you think that Russia's going to say yes? Now, you've seen Keith Kellogg and you've seen the Secretary of Defense Hegseth. They both have appeared over the last couple of months, especially, emphatically said that the force of personality of President Trump can get things done that Joe Biden couldn't, or any other president for that matter. The force of personality. I fear that Trump may have heard that and listened to it and believed it, and just thought, I'm going to call, even though all the fundamentals are against me, but because Secretary of Defense Hegseth and Keith Kellogg said that I have this force of personality that can change things, I can. And so I'm going to go in with this phone call with Putin here on July 3rd. I thought it was odd at the time. Why would you ask for that? Why would you ask for something that you're not going to get? I didn't understand it, but I don't know. I guess it doesn't hurt to ask. But the predictable instead happened, and Putin very politely, apparently, according to Trump, said, no, we're not going to do that. As you saw the readout there we put up just a second ago. They say our core conditions have not changed and will not change. And so, but Trump wanted to change. Well, he did. He got mad about it. And this is what he said. Here's how he's considering Putin now.
We get a lot of bullshit thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
Do you want to sanction him? Lindsey Graham has a sanctions bill on Russia. Do you want him to move ahead
I'm
with
looking
that?
at it, yeah. No, I'm looking. The Senate is passing and passed a very, very tough sanctions bill. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
And you'd sign that?
It's an optional bill. It's totally at my option. They pass it totally at my option, and to terminate totally at my option. And I'm looking at it very strongly.
So that was 3 days ago, and you saw in that Kristen Welker soundbite I played a second ago where she quoted him as saying, "There's some big announcement to be made on Monday." I actually checked his Truth Social just before we came on air here to see if he had any more information on that. Nothing so far, but he's teasing this big announcement to come on Monday. Well, he's already said he's going to start giving interceptor missiles, so that's not what he's going to say. And you got to wonder, what else is he going to say? Is there some new breakthrough in positive? Seems pretty unlikely, especially given that he says this whole BS issue here, and he said last night that he's still angry with Putin. I think the more likely situation is what he said 3 days ago on the 8th, which is, I'm seriously considering this sanctions bill. And who's been pushing this sanctions bill harder than anyone is Lindsey Graham. And we've shown you sound bites really all throughout this year. Many times he's just been begging and pleading for a soundbite. And understand that these guys are golfing buddies. This picture here from just a few days ago that is on Trump's Truth Social, he was wishing happy birthday to Lindsey Graham, and here they are on the golf course. So this is something they do all the time. So this guy's talking all the time about wanting sanctions and pleading to get them. Well, obviously, he's going to be doing that on the golf course too when they were going to be talking about this. And as a matter of fact, also yesterday, there was a number of both, Senator Graham included, Senator Blumenthal, and a number of other members of Congress are just aching to get more sanctions thrown on Russia.
July is going to be the magic month for bone-crushing sanctions on Vladimir Putin. He better get ready, because his economy, already on its heels, is going to be hit hard by these sanctions.
It's very important we change the game with Putin. He's not responding in a positive way. President Trump has earnestly reached out to Putin. I applaud his efforts to end this brutal bloodbath in Ukraine. But it takes willing partners. Ukraine has been willing, Putin has not.
There's definitely bipartisan support on it. We will. What Lindsey and myself and the leader want to make sure is that we're not getting ahead of the president and the State Department.
So far, I think you'll find in the Senate broad support for Ukraine. I think the president, trying to be a mediator, just simply hasn't had the success that all of us hoped he would have. Now it's time to face the fact that Mr. Putin wants war. He has no intentions of stopping, as many of us have said from day one. So
Putin has no intention of stopping war. He wants it. That's what we've been saying from day one. He just wants to go on. That's the mantra that we're talking about. You see Lindsey Graham there. So, well, I applaud the president for trying. So, again, kind of a version of that force of personality. He tried to give him an off-ramp, but that poor Putin, he just wouldn't take it. He had a chance, and now then we're going to bring as Senator Blumenthal said, the bone-crushing sanctions on. Okay, first of all, let's unpack a little bit of that. Bone-crushing sanctions. Who was it? Somebody, I can't think of. Oh, yeah, Biden. On the first couple of days of the war, actually before the war, he said he was going to bring crippling sanctions. That was the phrase of the day back then, that we're going to just crush their economy and just bring it to its knees. Apparently, that's what he told Putin behind the scenes in June of 2021, that if you attacked into Ukraine, that's what we're going to do. We kind of tried that. And now then, Russia has made itself sanctions proof. And for Blumenthal to sit there and say, yeah, the Russian economy is already on its heels. Is it really? The Russian economy is on its heels. That grew 4% last year, 4.3 the year before, something like that. It's expected to do less than that this year because it does have inflation. So that's certainly something that they don't like. And so they've downplayed a little bit, or they put down their expectations of how much growth they're going to have. So it's going to be less than 4% this year, according to them. But that is nothing compared to what our economy is doing. Remember, in the previous quarter, we had negative growth. We're hoping to get back into positive growth and eke back into a plus. Otherwise, we're going to officially and technically be in a recession. And you've seen, and many of our guests on this week from Europe especially have said, listen, many of the European countries are already in recession, and many of them others are at danger of going in there. The bloc as a whole is an anemic 0.5% growth. So you want to say that Russia at last year, 4% growth is on its heels, and just, boy, this little bit more? That's self-delusion, folks. That is just, you're fooling yourself. It's embarrassing, because the evidence is out there in open source. It's not hard for anybody to see. And we had George Mamsarovs on the show yesterday, and you saw him we talked about the sanctions issue. He says, look, you look all around Russia. I mean, our economy is perfectly fine for the regular people, for the people of the country. I mean, they're buying and selling things. Things are on the shelf. The quality of life is quite good. And you may recall, he even said, listen, the biggest impact to me is that I have a hard time finding spare parts for my American-made car. He said, can probably live without that, but that's just all he can do. That's, if you want to see that show there, it's quite good and very revealing. It's so you can go look at that on our channel. But that's George who made that comment yesterday. But you also have, even bigger issues that play here, is that you see Russia, because of all the sanctions we've had, because of the failure of the Biden crushing sanctions that we had before and crippling and all that, Russia is basically sanctions proof now. They have diversified their economy away from reliance on the West, so that there's just no levers left to play that can be bone crushing. Again, it's embarrassing that we believe the hype that we ourselves are creating out of our own minds and coming out of our own mouths, but that they're not going to have the effect. So if that's what Trump does on Monday, and it seems like that's the most likely, then if he was disappointed at the phone call, imagine he's going to be a little bit more disappointed when this doesn't seem to happen here. And of course, all on the front line, on the battlefield, Russia continues to methodically advance. They continue to methodically destroy the Ukrainian armed forces. And now then they're stepping up their production of aerial attacks, both missiles, cruise missiles, hypersonics, and then, of course, drones of various strategic lengths, especially the Garand 2s. So they're going all over. There was another batch last night, and many of them got through. And they just are causing devastation on the Ukraine side. And there's no end in sight to that. So no matter how much they self-congratulated themselves yesterday and today in Rome about they're going to rebuild and a new Marshall Plan and all that, it's just disintegrating as we speak on the battlefield and in the air. So you just have to ask, what is the plan here? What is the intention for the United States? And in fact, let's look the reaction from Russia, because they'd see all this back and forth going on too, and this we pause, we've unpaused, we're giving missiles, we're not giving missiles. If you think that this scares them, just look at Dmitry Medvedev a few days ago. He said the top American is riding his favorite political roller coaster again, and he talks about the back and forth. We're happy, we're not happy, we're pleased with the conversation, we're not. How should we treat this? He says, just like before, the way our warriors do, the way our commander-in-chief does, business as usual. Push forward to achieve the goals of the special military operation, reclaim our land, working hard for our victory. And of course, when he says pushing forward for the goals of the special military operation, that's a reference to what Putin told Trump himself on July 3rd, which is the core issues, which is no NATO in Ukraine, the demilitarization, denazification of the country, all those 12 points there that Gary's showing you on the screen. That's what they said in the last Istanbul meeting. Russia, again, reiterated through Sergei Lavrov that they remain open to a next round of direct talks with Ukraine. But folks, this 12-point plan ain't going to change any, because Russia doesn't have to. So that, again, gets back to, what is our plan? When America says something, can anyone take it at face value? The answer is definitely no. They can't, and they would be foolish to do so. Should they have listened to what Rubio said on April 18th? Should they listen to what Trump had said previously, that he was going to bring this to an end? Because now he's not bringing it to an end. Now he's basically, I'm sorry, but he's kind of being Biden light now, by going and saying, all right, now I'm going to do all this stuff, and we're going to give these missiles. So again, forget about who's paying for them for the moment. That's just kind of, okay, that's cool, I suppose. It's not that much money in the overall scheme of things, but those missiles, They have a hard number with them. You can't make them fast enough. And now you're going to give some more of them away. Axios said the first batch was only 10, which was not even minuscule. That's not enough to even be considered minuscule. Maybe he's going to give more now. But again, we have a limit. We're already below the threshold of what we need for our own security. So by going down this path because he's mad at Putin, he's actually reducing our national security capacity. Don't miss that. And now then we got to say, where are you going? What is actually important to the president of the United States? And the answer is, I don't know. And I don't think anybody else knows either. Maybe he just doesn't have one. It's often said that Trump is a transactional president, but I got to wonder, what's your transactions here? Because a transactional person, maybe they don't focus or they don't base their decisions on moral issues or on any strategic viewpoint or way of viewing things in the world they may have, but it's on a transaction basis here. Well, I can benefit here, so I'll take that or whatever. I don't even see that at play because it is so radically applied differently in different months or different weeks even, as you've seen graphically portrayed throughout this episode here. And you got to think that it's like if you had some kind of transactional intent, whereas we quote would benefit, that's not applying now. You could have made that case on April 18th. I was cheering that on because that made sense. But now then here, this one, it doesn't make sense. And if you think you're going to have some big announcement on Monday and you're going to announce some new sanctions, that's even going to be worse because Russia's not going to be, they're going to mock us. And that's what they are doing already. They're mocking us. They're laughing at us. Sergei Lavrov has done as much in diplomatic language here, even of late. When people ask him, are y'all afraid of sanctions? He just, uses his mocking language and says, yeah, no, we're not worried about that. And then he goes on, like I think we showed it yesterday at the ASEAN. They're expanding and accelerating their diversification to Asia, to Africa, to South America, to the global South. I mean, just all these different places. I mean, you have everything from the BRICS, of course, that's the big one, ASEAN, where they were here, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, all these different kinds of venues, both diplomatic and economic in nature. And of course, they've spread. They're closening, improving their relationships with China. They now have a military relationship with North Korea. They have very strategic associations with Iran, which is a transactional issue. They get drones and technology, and they give other things in response. We'll see where that ends up going, but it's certainly closer than it ever was before all this stuff happened. So every way you look, our actions are having negative consequences for us. It's not making Russia weaker. It's making Russia stronger and more independent and less susceptible to any kind of influence that we can have. And if Biden failed to bring crippling sanctions in 2022, then Trump trying bone-crushing sanctions in 2025 is going to be even less effective because of everything that's happened in between. So this is a troubling state of affairs for our country right now. No one can trust what we say. No one can just take our words at face value. No one knows what we stand for. What is the value system that America has? What is our view of the world? What is the objective that we want to see achieved? Because it changes every day. And usually it's no more than a verbal spout deep. Because if it changes the next day, or even forget about changing. We can say one thing one day, but do something very different that belies that as actually something that drives us. So if you have a world where either your allies or your adversaries can't trust anything that you say and they don't know where you stand, that is bad for our country because it leads to bad policies like we're doing right now. Our national security is being weakened because we're getting rid of ammunition stockpiles that are below what we need to defend ourselves, and we're weakening ourselves with both our allies and our adversaries. And we're strengthening our adversary in Russia. And really, you can even add China into that indirectly because they're all working closer together. And there's folks all over the world, billions of people that are looking at all this and going, man, the West just is detached from reality. If I'm going to peg myself to somebody, I'm going to see if I can get it done over here. You can't do that really fast because you've had almost a century of time of tying it to the West because that's always been seen as the most stable, the most rational, and the most freedom-loving. I mean, and a lot of that was genuine and earned. I mean, we've always had our darker side, and unfortunately, and there's always been errors and failures. But by and large, there was some reason for people to do that. That's fading away now because the darker spots are growing, folks, and the stability is fraying and falling apart and tearing at the seams. And we better get this reversed pretty quick, or we may one day find ourselves in a conflict we should never have been in, that we cannot win, and from which we may not be able to recover. That is my big concern and my big worry for our country right now. And I mean, this is not something you can say, well, let's just get a new Congress in 2026. I don't know that there's any new people out there, because you just exchange one bad one for another, quite frankly, because the system is just not set up to really bring about change. And it's going to be another 3.5 years before there's another president. So right now, folks, we got what we got. So we're going to have to do things like what we're doing right here by bringing you the truth, the unvarnished truth, being unintimidated and uncompromised to tell you what it is, and that maybe you need to do the same and share this with folks. Make your own social accounts. Go on some of these folks that you may see on Twitter and Instagram and various other social sites, and say, listen, this is important here. And also our podcast here. That sure reminded me about that, Gary. But because some people get their information on podcasts more than even videos here. Whatever you get, go to these places here. Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Type that in. You'll find it's on podcast. Share that with people. Send your own post. Do whatever. Take advantage of the opportunity that you have and what influence that we have as regular people, and make your voice heard. Because if there becomes enough of them, especially if the pain starts coming in and enough voices start getting up, even corrupt politicians will eventually bend to the will of the people because they want to stay in power. So we do at least have that going for us, and we'll continue to push that role here. You can continue to count on getting the truth uncompromised here in Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.